In order for security operation functions to have a meaningful conversation with application security teams or engineers, it needs to be about risk, not vulnerability.
Welcome to CyberOXtales, the podcast where cybersecurity scenarios meet reality. In each episode, we'll sit together with the top cyber pros to dissect major security incidents, giving you actionable insights and practical advice to fuel your playbooks and success. Ready? Let's go.
Hello. Hi, everybody. This is Nitzan Ziv. I will be your host today at CyberOXtales. And today with me, I've got a very good friend of mine, Samir. Samir, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely happy to, and great seeing you again, Nitsan. Hope you're enjoying the weather again.
I am.
So I am Samir Sherif, CISO for several years. Prior to that, I spent a good amount of my career in the banking world. And that's who I am. I'm here locally in New Jersey.
Okay, that's amazing. So first of all, neighbor to neighbor, that is great to hear. And today I want to pick your brain a bit and explain to our audience a bit about how do we scale the application security program using the Security Operations Center, and is it something headed towards our direction, especially now in the AI days? So, if you don't mind, I'll just start with a few questions just to warm the audience.
Sure.
I'll start with the most basic question. So, what's the difference between SOC and NOC? They sound the same, completely unrelated.
The good thing is they're both operation centers.
Yes.
One is security operations, and the other one is network. And the reason we use the terminology to differentiate one of the two is because in most cases, in a business world and technology world, you have the business functions that run the NOC or the network operations center. So they're monitoring for critical applications being running and performing as expected, meeting customer requirements, et cetera. And then you have the security functions and security teams looking for threats and risks that may be coming in, attacking those applications or the company itself. So that's the key difference between the two.
So, do you imagine a world where the Security Operations Center and the Network Operations Center actually become one thing, or are they doomed to continuously be separated?
I think we are at the point, and I'm going to roll back the time clock a little bit. Um, a few years ago, we moved to the world of the cloud, right? That happened super fast, just like AI is crawling right
Even
up,
faster,
even
definitely.
faster. But the entire terminology came out thinking, oh, we're in a digital economy. Really, what it meant was we're adopting cloud, we're moving to the cloud, data is sitting in the cloud, applications are running in the cloud, and the entire economy is now digitalized, and there's a much faster integration and communication. With that, we just have no choice anymore to stay separated. We have to integrate in some manner because the threat and data leakages and attacks are happening so fast between the application layer and the corporate layer and the infrastructure that runs and supports and really operates the business day in day out. So we can resist, but we are at the point where we have to figure out how to integrate and look at risk between the two areas.
Do you see a connection where availability and security are related to the same issues or same incidents? Or are you saying, hey, like security happens and the network operations center is usually agnostic to that?
They used to be agnostic to it, but what's happening, as going back to what we said earlier, because the lines are blurred, whenever there's a blip, even on the network side, I see it with my teams where they're calling the security teams to say, do you think this could potentially be a security issue? Or the security side could pick up the phone and say, do you think this is going to impact the outage? Because this is, attacking a known CVE, we may have issues and risk, and everybody starts talking. I think that whole interaction needs to be automated. So going back to why we need to integrate them is because we can't rely on humans to constantly pick up go on Slack messages or instant messaging and say, I see this, do you see it over there? And that just doesn't work.
So, how can Security Operations Center actually work in AppSec or help scale the AppSec program? Do you imagine this happening?
Absolutely. And I think the AppSec, there are really two pieces of the AppSec problem. There's one before it goes to production, which we're not talking about. All the basics of what you have to do to engineer it right, test it correctly before you make it, have it in a running state. But once it's up and operational, there are several layers. One is it critical? Is it sitting behind a certain type of protection or not? And if it's a critical application, is it impacting critical data? So you have to go through all these exercises to say, this is one asset that I really worry about more than the other. If so, then I need to have some layers of defense on it, whether I'm going to run a particular security monitoring tool on it, monitor the data, etc. The pieces where the connectivity happens and where we are going to be essentially starting now, unless I think I see a lot of the large organizations already doing this, but then I think the others are not there yet, is the functions collapsing together to be able to build the concept of resilience. Right. Security teams are talking about resilience. The business is saying we need to be resilient from business continuity. It's one and the same, right? At the end of the day, whether you're looking at it from a security lens or business resiliency, it's about resiliency. So how are you going to be resilient if you don't have real-time visibility into risk? Call it security risk, outage risk. It's still risk by using and at least agreeing on the two tools that the tools that you're going to be deploying everywhere to monitor all of that. So that's how I think it's going to really have to work together and orchestrate very, well as well.
So when I'm looking on it, I'm saying today most of application security is unrelated to the security operations center.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is actually how do you train people on AppSec? How do you find the commonality to what they're doing right now to instead of just building a new practice, saying how do I expand what I'm already teaching them, the tools, the systems, automation, the playbook? How do you build on top of it?
Yeah, I think there are two ways to build on that. One is, from the shift left perspective, the right visibility and risk tooling that they will need to respond to threats is one aspect. The other aspect with the whole collapsing of the functions is to make sure that they use the same tools to have the same visibility. A concept that I've seen and used quite heavily in the banking space is, continuous monitoring, right, for AppSec on the production, right, and there, the ways you can do it. Back during my banking days, we were doing it as well, but we were doing it with tooling that were, I guess, impactful from an performance perspective. So we would look for green zones and run those tools during green zones because at some point somebody could be changing configuration, could be doing some sort of changes, emergency fixes that could have an impact to the security state of the technology. So you always have to have some monitoring. Think of it like a checks and balance. But now now that we are much more in a digital world where all of those dependencies are running through supply chain risk of SaaS integrations and APIs, you're going to have that constantly running and give you that constant visibility, right? So at the beginning we said, why do we think that the NOC and the socket are going to integrate? Well, you just don't have a choice because you're not operating the applications like you used to build in the past, right? And that's really where the challenges and opportunities come in.
So I think that you're alluding to something bigger than that. I think that right now we've got new technologies that are transforming or even accelerating the digital transformation, especially in the AI world, which now became synonymous with innovation.
That's right.
And rebuilding. So my question to you is, first of all, what is AI going to unlock for AppSec, for the Security Operations Center, for their integration? How do you see this play out? And I know it's completely visionary at this point, but
Right.
give us your best.
It's visionary, but I think I'm already seeing it adopted. And we're starting with the low-hanging fruit, right? So roll back in the 1990s, object-oriented development came out, and everybody was super excited. This is going to revolutionize and change everything. It's going to automate all the manual work. Yes, it did, but it also did a lot more. It got us to where we are today with the digital economy. AI is going to be going through the same journey in a much smaller time frame. right? I mean, already in the months that we've been in this phase of talking about AI, automation is already being adopted, right? It's good at doing that. At the end of the day, AI is just math, right? It's doing the math, computation of some form and helping you
I
all the
think this ship is already sailed. It's like it's not that anymore.
right, right, and I think when I look at security operations and knock and sock, adoption to do all that repetitive automation, simplification is already happening. Where I am going to see it further expand into is all the tougher questions that need to be answered more quickly, right? The much more elevated level of analysis that's needed to make decisions on, yeah, I need to do something. Maybe I need to, restart a particular environment, whether it's Kubernetes or others, reset and restart, all of those decisions can be done by AI. You do not need a human interaction. So level one for security operations, network operations, I think you could run them quite well with AI. But very quickly, we're already looking at use cases and strategy of how you can do level two, which would be phenomenal to see that being more widely adopted this year.
Amazing. So let's assume that this theory actually goes through and everything is starting to use AI as like tier one.
Mhm.
What do you think we can actually offload from application security? It's like, is it 90% of the noise? Is it 10% of the noise? What is your best guess?
It's not even noise. I think what will offload and enable the existing teams and new teams that are going into the application security space is to give them the ability to think about risk, because one of the biggest challenges we used to talk about with AppSec was you can test and go back and forth and fix bugs, constantly update code and correct vulnerabilities. But at the end of the day, the risk lies in how well the technology is designed in the first place. Like how well are you going to do security architecture, or from the application perspective, do an application security. That is really difficult. But now that could be done in a much easier way. The engineer that would never even contemplate getting into the security architecture space can do that going forward, and have that insight to actually build the right attack model and say, these are the areas of attack I'm concerned about, and these are the ones that I need to take an extra step and secure them in a certain manner, and be able to actually sit with engineers and have the right conversation. In the past, that was a very difficult task. When I was in the banking space, we only had a handful of security architects, right? And I think we will see that elevated capability and skill sets of folks actually adopting and being able to do that level of work that couldn't have done it without AI.
So I want to go back to something you said, which is the Security Operations Center having a discussion with engineers. Now, this is probably one of the loudest places that I've heard ever in discussion with Security Operations Center, because most of the Security Operations Center guys that I've talked with saying, hey, talking with IT, we're sharing the same language. Talking with developers, we're not sure in what language is this conversation even happening. How do you help them with this, saying, hey, this is a great way to talk about risk versus your code, which, of course, they are coming from a disadvantaged position?
Right. I think that they're not disadvantaged, in my opinion. That's just a personal opinion. The, we talk a lot about culture and changing culture and influencing a culture of security culture, right? But that is an engagement. Or the lack of it. And the only way we can break that barrier is to have the right conversation. The one ways we've done it is having the regular, bi-monthly meeting with the right stakeholders. I think that's great, just to kind of level set on where data is, where metrics are, where we want to be organizationally. But more fundamentally, day in, day out, that line of communication needs to be at even a lower level. Right. So if I'm going to change a culture anywhere, the first thing I always say is who's talking to whom. If there's a dev lead, dev engineer, what is his relationship with an engineer in the IT space? Who does he know in the security space? Are those three actually talking together? Right. And I think that is the key to get that language straight and clear. And more importantly, security teams and IT and engineers on the product side should not be just yes, they should all, everybody thinks and worries about security and, it's security first culture, etc. But at the end of the day, even simple decisions on what is the right solution for risk analysis, for risk monitoring, whether for security operations or even for risk testing for vulnerabilities, should be a conversation with all groups. That way they can all agree and understand what to do with the data that comes out, regardless if it's owned and paid for by one function or the other.
So, if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is that it's all about the fundamentals of communication of risk. If you'll find the right way to communicate the risk in a way that is intuitive, that is explaining to everybody why is it important, why is it impactful, why is it reachable, why is it exploitable, just common terms that the security operations center is already using those terms, but I've never seen a lot of, oh no, I wouldn't say never, but I've seen very little amount of cases where this is actually applying to the application security space. If you're saying take those fundamentals and actually use them, that's the right way to communicate the risk.
Right. Even using the language of risk versus vulnerability is important um, because at the end of the day, there is the mentality, right, from some functions where, yeah, here we go, another vulnerability. We have vulnerabilities everywhere. There's CVE scores everywhere. But we have to talk about risk, not specifically vulnerability. Yes, security teams need to understand what the vulnerabilities are, what level, what the CVEs are, do all that monitoring, but the translation should be equal across all functions on risk. Ultimately, then we can have the right conversation with the business leaders that we have a high risk or critical risk in this space and actually agree on what that really means from an impact.
So if I'm summing it all up to like one digestible token that you can give everybody is if you want to make sure that your security operations center is able to clearly communicate with engineering, is talk about risk.
Talk
Don't
about
go to code, don't go to vulnerabilities, talk about risk, the place where its SOC shines.
that's right, 100%.
Amazing. Samir, thank you very much for sharing your insights. As always, enjoy talking with you and getting your insights about the future and where we're headed.
That's a wrap on another episode of CyberOXtales. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your peers. Visit us at ox.security/podcast to access all episodes and exclusive content or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.